I watched the dark iced tea drip down my expensive white silk blouse, soaking into the fabric as my 30-year-old brother panted with rage. He had just screamed in front of our entire family that I was a pathetic liar making up fake real estate deals to steal his spotlight. My mother immediately rushed over, but she did not hand me a towel. Instead, she frantically dried my brother's hands, cooing that he was just stressed from his demanding job. But the true shock came seconds later when my grandfather started laughing uncontrollably and dropped a truth bomb that made the entire yard go dead silent. My name is Fiona, and I am 34 years old. For my entire life, I was treated as the invisible second option in my own family, while my younger brother Chase got handed the world on a silver platter. I quietly built an empire in the shadows, while he loudly drove my father's business into the ground. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to quietly endure being the scapegoat to a golden child sibling only to prove them all wrong in the end. The 4th of July has always been a massive production in the Miller household. My parents, Harrison and Linda, live for these performative holidays. They hosted a lavish barbecue in their sprawling backyard in the affluent suburbs of Chicago. The grill was fired up, the expensive catered sides were laid out on the patio tables, and extended family members mingled with my parents' country club friends. From the outside, we looked like the picture-perfect American family. But the reality was a deeply entrenched system of favoritism that dictated every interaction we ever had. I stood near the edge of the manicured lawn, swirling a glass of sparkling water, watching my brother Chase hold court near the pool. Chase was 30 years old, the newly appointed vice president of my father's logistics company, a title he had earned simply by sharing my father's last name and possessing a charismatic, albeit arrogant, smile. While he bragged loudly to a group of my uncle's friends about his latest golf trip, I could not help but reflect on the glaring disparities in our upbringings. When Chase turned 16, my parents surprised him with a brand new $80,000 Porsche in the driveway, complete with a giant red bow. When I turned 16 2 years prior, my mother handed me a bus schedule and suggested I start applying for after-school jobs if I wanted to buy my own clothes. When Chase was accepted to Yale, my father proudly paid the exorbitant tuition in full without a second thought. When I showed them my acceptance letter to a solid state university, my father chuckled and told me not to waste my time. He advised me to take a few local courses, keep myself looking pretty, and focus on finding a rich husband to take care of me. I did not listen. I worked grueling night shifts as a waitress, smelling like stale grease and pure exhaustion, just to pay my state college tuition. I scraped by studying supply chain management between serving tables, fueled by a burning desire to never rely on anyone else for my survival. I eventually became a highly sought-after supply chain consultant. But what my family did not know was that I took every massive commission I earned and quietly funneled it into a blind LLC purchasing commercial real estate. Over the last decade, I had built a lucrative portfolio completely under the radar. As the barbecue chatter reached a crescendo, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I checked the screen and saw my real estate broker's name. My heart gave a familiar, thrilling leap. I slipped away from the crowded lawn, moving toward the quiet wrap-around deck near the sliding glass doors of the kitchen, seeking a moment of privacy. I answered the call, keeping my voice low and steady. My broker delivered the news I had been working tirelessly toward for the past 8 months. The closing paperwork had officially cleared. I was now the sole owner of the massive industrial park located on the city's east side. It was a monumental acquisition, a commercial plaza that solidified my financial empire. I thanked him, a genuine smile spreading across my face as I confirmed the final wire transfers. I ended the call and let out a long, satisfied breath, feeling the weight of the massive achievement settle over me. But the peaceful moment was instantly shattered. I turned around to find Chase standing just inside the sliding glass door. He had stepped inside to grab a drink from the kitchen and had clearly been eavesdropping on my entire conversation. His face, usually tanned and relaxed, was flushed a deep, ugly red. His jaw was clenched so tightly a vein throbbed in his neck. Chase had always possessed a volatile temper, especially when he felt threatened or outshined, but the look in his eyes right now was pure, unadulterated venom. Before I could even ask what was wrong, he shoved the sliding screen door open with such force it banged loudly against its frame, drawing the attention of several nearby guests. He marched straight toward me, holding a massive sweating glass of dark sugary iced tea. I stood my ground, my phone still clutched in my hand. I was wearing a brand new tailored white silk blouse, a piece I had bought to subtly celebrate my closing day. Chase did not slow down. He closed the distance between us, locked his furious eyes onto mine, and then deliberately stumbled forward. It was the most theatrical, intentional trip I had ever witnessed. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he threw the entire contents of his glass directly at my chest. The freezing, sticky liquid hit me with a shocking splat, instantly soaking through the delicate white silk and ruining the garment completely. Ice cubes tumbled down the front of my shirt and shattered on the wooden deck. I gasped at the sudden cold, taking a step back, staring at the dark brown stain rapidly spreading across my chest. "You are pathetic!" Chase screamed, his voice echoing across the sudden silence of the backyard. The music seemed to fade away, as every single guest, including my parents, turned to stare at us. "You are a pathetic, desperate liar, making up fake phone calls about buying commercial real estate just to sound important." I stood there dripping with sweet tea, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I wiped a stray drop of tea from my chin and looked at him calmly. "I am not making anything up, Chase, and you just ruined a very expensive shirt because you cannot handle someone else succeeding. You are a supply chain consultant." He spat the words like a curse. "You check spreadsheets for a living. Do not stand here on Dad's deck and pretend you are closing multi-million-dollar deals. You are just jealous that I am running the company and you are a nobody. You are trying to steal my spotlight today because you know you are a failure." The sound of frantic footsteps interrupted his tirade. My mother Linda pushed her way through the crowd of stunned guests, her face a mask of absolute panic. But as she reached us, she did not look at my ruined shirt. She did not ask if I was okay. Instead, she pulled a cloth napkin from her apron and immediately grabbed Chase's hands. "Oh, my poor boy," she cooed, frantically wiping the condensation from his fingers. "It is okay, honey. You are just stressed from the long hours at the office. You lost your balance, that is all. It was an accident." I stared at her in utter disbelief. "Mom," he threw his drink directly at me. He just screamed in my face. Linda turned to glare at me, her eyes narrowing with that familiar dismissive irritation she always reserved for me. "Fiona, please stop being so dramatic. Your brother works 70 hours a week keeping your father's legacy afloat. He tripped. If you were not standing right in the doorway trying to show off on your phone, you would not have gotten wet. Go inside and change, you are making a scene in front of the neighbors." My father Harrison abandoned his post at the grill and marched over a pair of tongs still gripped tightly in his fist. He looked from Chase's supposedly trembling hands to my stained shirt and immediately sided with the golden child. "Fiona, apologize to your brother," he demanded, his voice thick with unwarranted authority. "Apologize for what I asked." My voice rising just a fraction, refusing to be cowed by their systemic gaslighting. For getting assaulted with a beverage because Chase is violently insecure. For mentioning a business deal he chose to eavesdrop on. "You are provoking him with your delusional lies," Harrison growled, stepping closer to try and intimidate me. "We all know you do not have the money to buy a coffee shop, let alone an industrial park. Stop trying to compete with your brother's success. It is embarrassing for all of us." I looked at the three of them. The spoiled 30-year-old man-child smirking behind our mother. The mother furiously defending the indefensible, and the father demanding I apologize for being attacked. The injustice of it all burned hot in my chest. "Yao bought him an $80,000 sports car when he was a teenager," I said, my voice cutting clearly through the tense summer air. "You handed him an Ivy League education on a silver platter. I worked night shifts smelling like fryer grease, just to pay for my own textbooks at a state school, because you told me to go find a rich husband. I built my life from absolute scratch, while you handed him a vice president title he does not even have the discipline to earn. I do not need to make up lies to compete with Chase. I passed him years ago." Chase lunged forward, but Harrison threw an arm out to stop him. "Do not speak to us about disrespect," Harrison shouted. "You are a bitter, jealous woman, Fiona. You will never have what Chase has." The tension in the yard was suffocating. Extended family members looked away, too uncomfortable to intervene, entirely complicit in their silence. I felt a familiar cold isolation settling over me. I was preparing to turn around, walk out of the gate, and never look back. But before I could take a single step, a deep, booming laugh shattered the tension. It was a rich, full-bellied laugh that echoed from the shaded corner of the patio. Everyone, including my furious parents, turned their heads in shock. Sitting in his wheelchair, holding a glass of iced tea of his own, was my Grandpa Thomas. He was 82 years old, a sharp-witted self-made patriarch who had built the family wealth from the ground up before Harrison inherited it. He rarely spoke at these gatherings, usually observing the chaos with a quiet, knowing gaze. But right now, he was laughing so hard, he had to wipe a tear from his eye. Grandpa Thomas slammed the heavy rubber tip of his wooden cane onto the deck, the sharp crack making Linda flinch. He wheeled himself forward slightly, his sharp blue eyes locking directly onto Chase's pale face. "She is not lying, you spoiled brat," Grandpa Thomas said, his voice carrying the gravelly weight of absolute authority. The smirk completely vanished from Chase's face. My father lowered his grill tongs, looking bewildered. "Dad, what are you talking about? Fiona is just making up stories to cause trouble." Grandpa Thomas shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment crossing his weathered features as he looked at my parents. "You two are blind. You have been blind for 30 years. He turned his gaze back to Chase, leaning forward in his chair. "Fiona is not making up fake real estate deals, Chase. In fact, she just bought the primary industrial park your father's logistics company is currently leasing." Linda stepped forward, her maternal instincts kicking in to protect her favorite child from this perceived threat. She positioned herself firmly in front of Chase, as if trying to shield a grown 30-year-old man from the truth. "Thomas, this is a very cruel prank to play on your grandson," Linda said, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. "Chase works so hard for the family business. He carries the weight of this entire company on his shoulders. You know how sensitive he is about his responsibilities. Why would you say something so horrible just to upset him? Jillian could never afford a property like that. She is just a consultant. She is not an executive. She does not have that kind of capital." My grandfather let out a low, humorless chuckle that made my mother shrink back. "You have spent your entire life underestimating her, Linda," he said, shaking his head in disgust. "You looked at a brilliant, determined woman and saw nothing but a disappointment because she refused to play by your shallow rules. You coddled this boy behind you. You bought his degrees, you bought his cars, you bought his entire identity. And what do you have to show for it? A grown man who throws beverages at women when he feels insecure." Chase finally found his voice. It was not his usual booming, confident tone, but a high-pitched, desperate stammer. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She manipulated you," Chase yelled, stepping out from behind our mother. "That is the only way this is possible. She went behind our backs and manipulated you into giving her the money. You bought it for her. You used the family trust fund to buy that property, and you put her name on it just to spite me. That is our money. That is my inheritance. You are stealing from the family to fund her delusional real estate games." My father seized upon Chase's accusation like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. "Yes, that has to be it," Harrison declared, his chest heaving as he glared at my grandfather. "You financed this. You went around me, the actual CEO of this family, and you funneled money to Jillian. Do you realize what you have done? You have jeopardized the stability of our entire corporate structure just to play favorites. I am your son. Chase is your grandson. We are the ones running the empire you built. How could you betray us like this?" The sheer hypocrisy of my father accusing someone else of playing favorites was almost comical. He had spent his entire adult life making sure Chase received every financial, emotional, and professional advantage while actively working to keep me marginalized. He had literally told me my only value was finding a wealthy husband. Now he was standing on his expensive patio clutching his pearls because the scales of power had unexpectedly shifted. My grandfather did not yell. He did not need to. He simply looked at my father with an expression of such absolute pity that it was devastating to witness. "I did not give her a single dime." "Harrison," my grandfather said, his voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register that carried perfectly across the silent yard. "I did not co-sign a loan. I did not transfer trust funds. I did not pull strings at the bank. I simply sat back and watched her build an empire right under your nose while you were too busy taking chase on expensive golf retreats and ignoring the warning signs in your own accounting department. The guests who had been awkwardly standing around holding their plates of barbecue suddenly realized they were witnessing the total collapse of a powerful local family. A few of the more polite neighbors began setting their drinks down and quietly making their way toward the side gate, eager to escape the escalating blast radius. The picture-perfect 4th of July celebration was dead. The facade of the happy, successful Miller family was shattered beyond repair. Harrison turned slowly, his eyes locking onto me. The look on his face was one of complete and utter horror. It was as if he was seeing me for the very first time. He was not looking at the rebellious daughter he loved to criticize. He was looking at a massive financial threat. He was looking at the woman who now legally owned the ground his business stood on. "Is it true?" Harrison asked, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "Is what your grandfather's saying true? Are you the new owner of the Oak Street Industrial Park?" I stood tall despite the sticky tea drying on my skin. I did not shrink away from his intense gaze. I did not apologize to make him feel more comfortable. I simply looked at the man who had spent 3 decades telling me I was not enough, and I delivered the final crushing blow to his reality. "Yes, I am the owner," I said, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any emotion. "The closing documents were finalized 20 minutes ago. My holding company now owns the entire facility. And considering you just demanded that I apologize to the vice president of your company for getting a drink thrown in my face, I suggest you start reevaluating exactly how you speak to your commercial landlord." The silence in the kitchen stretched out heavy and thick. I let Harrison sweat, watching his eyes dart nervously around the room as he waited for me to agree to his insane demand. He actually thought I would cave. He thought decades of conditioning me to be the compliant background daughter would automatically kick in, that I would eagerly hand over my multi-million-dollar asset just to finally earn a crumb of his validation. I slowly uncrossed my arms, feeling the damp silk of my ruined blouse pull uncomfortably against my skin. "You want me to transfer the deed of my property to the family trust," I said, my voice perfectly level. "You want me to take the commercial real estate portfolio that I built over 10 years, using my own money, and hand it over to the very company that Chase just drove to the brink of bankruptcy." "It is for the family," Harrison pleaded, stepping forward with his hands clasped together. "Fiona, we are desperate. If you do not do this, the company goes under. Your brother's career will be ruined. My legacy will be destroyed. We will lose our standing in the community. You have to save us." I looked him dead in the eye. "No," I said. Harrison blinked as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, absolutely under no circumstances will I ever give you or Chase a single square foot of my property," I replied, enunciating every word with sharp, precise clarity. "You handed Chase the keys to your empire because you thought he was inherently better than me. You let him make aggressive, reckless financial decisions because you refused to oversee his work. You allowed him to ruin your legacy. That is your mess, Dad. I am not cleaning it up." Harrison's face contorted with sudden violent rage. The desperate father vanished instantly, replaced by the furious tyrant who was used to getting his way. "You ungrateful, selfish little girl," he shouted, slamming his hand down on the marble kitchen island. "We are your family. You owe us. If you do not transfer that deed by Monday, I will make sure you are cut out of this family forever. You will not see a dime of inheritance. We will disown you." I actually laughed, a short, sharp sound of pure amusement. "Disown me," I countered. "Dad, you just admitted you are on the verge of bankruptcy. You have no inheritance left to withhold. Your golden boy gambled it all away on the West Coast. You have absolutely zero leverage over me." Before Harrison could formulate a response, the sliding glass door ripped open. Chase stormed into the kitchen, his face twisted into an ugly mask of desperation and fury. He had clearly realized that his comfortable, wealthy lifestyle was actively imploding, and he needed someone to blame. "If you do not give us the property, I will break the lease," Chase screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "I am the vice president of operations. I have the authority to terminate our rental agreements. I will break the lease tomorrow morning. We will pack up all our inventory and move out of your precious industrial park by the end of the month." He took a step closer, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. Let us see how successful your little real estate empire is when your biggest tenant walks out, Chase snarled. You will be stuck with a massive empty warehouse and a commercial mortgage you cannot pay. The bank will foreclose on you in 3 months. I will personally make sure you go bankrupt, Fiona. You are going to lose everything. I stood my ground, looking up at my brother's red, furious face. He truly believed he had me cornered. He thought he possessed the ultimate trump card, a business maneuver that would force me into submission. He was so arrogant, so incredibly confident in his own superiority, that he had completely forgotten who he was dealing with. I let a cold shark-like smile spread across my face. You want to break the lease? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. Yes, Chase spat, crossing his arms over his chest. Consider your tenant gone. You are ruined. That is a fascinating business strategy, Chase, I said, slowly circling the kitchen island, so I was standing directly between him and our father. Especially considering the new lease extension agreement you signed last month. Chase frowned, his confidence faltering for a fraction of a second. What are you talking about? I signed a standard commercial extension with the property management firm. It was routine paperwork. Yes, you did, I agreed, nodding smoothly. You signed an extension with Apex Property Management, the management firm that I own, the firm that represents my holding company. And because you are so brilliant, Chase, because you are such a high-level executive, you eagerly signed a 70-page commercial lease agreement without having your legal team review it first. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the marble countertop. You were in a rush that day. I recalled watching the color slowly begin to drain from his face. You were heading out to a golf weekend in Scottsdale. You just wanted the paperwork off your desk, so you grabbed a pen, flipped to the back page, and signed your name right on the dotted line. Harrison looked at Chase, his eyes wide with sudden terror. Chase, what did you sign? What did you do? I will tell you what he signed. Dad, I offered brightly. He signed an ironclad, non-negotiable corporate lease extension that includes a very specific early termination clause. If the tenant chooses to break the lease and vacate the premises before the 5-year term is complete, they are legally required to pay a penalty fee of exactly $2 million, payable in full within 30 days of the termination notice. The silence that hit the kitchen was so heavy, it felt like the air pressure in the room had physically changed. Chase stopped breathing. He stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant, as his brain struggled to process the magnitude of his catastrophic mistake. $2 million, Harrison whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at his son. We do not have $2 million. We do not even have $200,000 in liquid cash. So here are your options, I said, standing up straight and looking at the two men who had tormented me my entire life. Option 1, you break the lease. You move your inventory out of my building. I immediately sue your company for the $2 million penalty, force you into immediate corporate liquidation, and seize whatever remaining assets you have left to satisfy the debt. I paused, letting the reality of their destruction wash over them. Option 2. I continued, my voice hard and unyielding. You stay in my building. You pay your $42,000 in rent on the first of every single month directly to my holding company. And you spend the rest of your miserable career knowing that the daughter you treated like garbage is the only reason you still have a roof over your business. I picked up my purse from the kitchen counter, stepping carefully around the puddle of iced tea on the floor. I suggest you start looking for ways to cut corporate expenses, I advised, looking at Chase's expensive designer watch. I do not tolerate late rent. Have a wonderful 4th of July. I turned my back on my father and my brother, leaving them standing in the absolute wreckage of their own making, and walked out the front door. The paralysis that had gripped my brother finally shattered. Chase took a sudden, aggressive step forward, his expensive loafers scraping harshly against the wooden deck. The sheer terror in his eyes rapidly morphed into a defensive, explosive rage. This was his default survival mechanism. Whenever Chase was backed into a corner, he went on the attack. You manipulated him, Chase screamed, thrusting a finger toward my grandfather. He turned his furious gaze back to me. You went crying to Grandpa Thomas and you manipulated him into liquidating my inheritance. You conned an 82-year-old man into buying commercial real estate under your name just so you could steal my money and pretend you are a success. You are nothing but a gold-digging thief. The guests who had lingered near the edges of the patio gasped at the accusation. My mother, Linda, immediately seized upon this narrative. It gave her a way to make sense of the impossible. "Yes, that has to be it," she cried out, stepping up beside Chase. "Thomas, how could you let her take advantage of your finances like this? You know how manipulative she can be when she wants attention." I stood perfectly still, letting their desperate accusations wash over me. For years, this kind of coordinated attack would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt. I would have scrambled to defend my character. But today, their predictable gaslighting just felt utterly pathetic. I looked at my grandfather. He simply raised his glass of iced tea, took a slow sip, and gave me a subtle nod. The floor was mine. I turned my attention back to my brother. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to scream to command the space. I did not use a single dime of Grandpa Thomas's money, Chase. I said my words, slicing through the humid summer air with absolute precision. I did not ask for a loan. I did not ask for a cosigner. I did not ask for an early inheritance. I bought that industrial park entirely on my own. Chase let out a loud, mocking scoff. "Please, you are a mid-level consultant. You do not have the capital to secure a commercial mortgage for a property of that magnitude. Stop lying. I am not a mid-level consultant." "Chase," I corrected him, keeping my posture relaxed but dominant. 10 years ago, while you were failing your entry-level business courses at Yale and charging thousands of dollars in bar tabs to Dad's credit card, I was working 3 jobs. I used every single paycheck to build my own logistics consulting firm. I registered a blind holding company to keep my name out of the public records because I knew the second our parents found out I was successful, they would try to claim credit for it or demand a cut. I watched the blood slowly drain from Chase's face as the reality of my words began to sink in. My firm currently manages the supply chain optimization for 4 of the largest retail distributors in the Midwest. I continued, laying out the facts like weapons on a table. My profit margins are staggering because I actually do the work. I took the revenue from my firm, and I began acquiring commercial properties 6 years ago. The industrial park your father's company currently occupies is my 3rd major acquisition. I secured the mortgage using the equity from my other properties and my own liquid capital. Grandpa Thomas did not buy it for me. He simply offered me his congratulations when the closing paperwork cleared today. The complete destruction of Chase's narrative was absolute. He had no counter-argument. He could not blame nepotism because he was the only one who benefited from it. He could not blame manipulation because the financial records would easily prove my independence. He was staring at a woman who had outworked him, out-earned him, and outsmarted him in every conceivable way. This was the exact moment the dynamic shifted. The systemic betrayal of my parents took on a chilling new form. My father, Harrison, had been standing near the grill, processing the sheer volume of wealth I had just casually revealed. The dismissive, arrogant father who had demanded I apologize just 5 minutes ago completely vanished. In his place stood a man consumed by sudden, dangerous greed. Harrison dropped his grill tongs onto the side table. He marched across the patio, completely ignoring the fact that my white silk blouse was currently ruined and sticking to my skin from his son's violent outburst. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not reprimand Chase. He walked right past his golden boy and grabbed my upper arm with a bruising grip. "We need to talk inside right now," Harrison demanded, his voice low and urgent. He did not wait for my response. He turned and practically dragged me toward the sliding glass doors. I could have yanked my arm away, but my strategic curiosity won out. I wanted to see exactly how far his greed would push him. I let him pull me into the cool, air-conditioned kitchen. Linda followed hot on our heels, sliding the glass door shut behind her to cut off the prying eyes of the remaining barbecue guests. Chase trailed behind her, looking like a reprimanded child. The kitchen was pristine, silent, and suffocatingly tense. Harrison released my arm and paced the length of the marble island, running his hands over his face. When he finally turned to look at me, his eyes were wide with a manic, calculating energy. "Fiona, this changes everything," Harrison said, his tone shifting into a bizarrely forced warmth. "I had no idea you had built such a substantial portfolio. You should have told us. We are family. We should be working together, not keeping secrets." I stood near the sink, keeping a safe distance from them. I narrowed my eyes. Save the family legacy. What exactly does that mean, Mom? Harrison let out a heavy sigh, adopting the posture of a weary, burdened executive. He leaned against the counter, looking at me with an expression that was supposed to convey deep paternal trust. I am going to be honest with you, Fiona. Harrison began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The logistics company has hit a bit of a rough patch recently. The market is tough. Operating costs are up. We have had some cash flow issues. Having you as our landlord is a miracle. It means we can keep everything in-house. I watched him carefully. He was lying. Or at least he was severely minimizing the truth. So you want a discount on rent? I asked, testing the waters. Harrison laughed nervously. A discount? No, sweetheart. We need you to transfer the deed of the industrial park into the family trust. The sheer audacity of the demand hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, wondering if the summer heat had actually melted his brain. You want me to sign over a multi-million-dollar commercial property to the family trust? A trust that is exclusively controlled by you and Chase. It is the only logical step, Linda chimed in, stepping closer to Harrison. We are a family unit, Fiona. What belongs to one of us supports all of us. The company is the heart of this family. If you transfer the property, we will not have to worry about monthly rental expenses. We can leverage the equity of the industrial park to secure the new lines of credit the company desperately needs. I looked at Chase, who was standing by the refrigerator, avoiding my gaze. He was sweating heavily, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and he looked physically ill. Wait a minute, I said, raising a hand to stop my mother's rambling. The company needs new lines of credit. Dad, your company has been generating massive revenues for 3 decades. You had zero corporate debt when Grandpa Thomas handed you the reins. How could you possibly need to leverage my property for a line of credit unless you are entirely out of capital? Harrison's face tightened. I told you we had a rough patch. A rough patch does not require you to beg your estranged daughter for the deed to a commercial warehouse. I shot back, my analytical mind piecing the puzzle together rapidly. You are not just experiencing cash flow issues. You are defaulting. You are drowning. Chase suddenly slammed his fist against the refrigerator door. Just give us the damn building, Fiona, he shouted, his panic breaking through his silence. You have other properties. You have your consulting firm. We need this one. If we do not eliminate our overhead and secure that credit line by the end of the quarter, the bank is going to call in our existing loans. The entire logistics company will go under. 2 weeks passed in a state of tense silence. My father did not call. My mother did not text. Chase did not attempt to break the commercial lease. The impending threat of a $2 million penalty had effectively paralyzed them, just as I intended. But I knew my family too well to believe they had surrendered. They were simply regrouping. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a calendar invite sent to my professional email. My father requested a family alignment meeting at the corporate headquarters of his logistics company. The agenda simply read structural planning. I knew exactly what it was. It was an ambush. I drove to the industrial park, the very same property I now owned, and parked in the visitor section. Walking into my father's corporate office always felt like stepping into a shrine dedicated to his own ego. The lobby walls were lined with framed articles highlighting his early business successes and massive portraits of him shaking hands with local politicians. There were no pictures of me. There was only one picture of Chase, taken the day he was appointed vice president. I bypassed the receptionist and walked straight back to the executive boardroom. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped inside. The scene before me was perfectly orchestrated to project intimidation and control. My father sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, wearing his most expensive power suit. My mother, Linda, sat to his right, her posture rigid, and her face arranged in a mask of stern maternal disappointment. Chase sat to his left, looking significantly more arrogant than the last time I saw him sweating in my kitchen. He had clearly convinced himself that whatever plan they hatched today was going to magically save him from his financial ruin. But it was the fourth person in the room that confirmed my suspicions. Sitting next to Chase was Kevin, the company's longtime corporate lawyer. Kevin was notoriously shady, a man who specialized in bullying small vendors and drafting aggressive contracts that skirted the edge of legality. "Please take a seat, Jillian," my father said, gesturing to the lone empty chair at the opposite end of the long table. "We have a lot of important ground to cover today." I did not sit. I remained standing near the door, keeping my posture relaxed but vigilant. "I prefer to stand," I replied. "What exactly is the purpose of this alignment meeting, Dad?" Kevin the lawyer cleared his throat and slid a thick stack of stapled papers across the polished wood surface. The packet stopped right at the edge of the table nearest to me. "We have drafted a property management transfer agreement," Kevin stated using his most condescending legal tone. "Your father and brother have explained the unfortunate misunderstanding regarding the ownership of this facility. For the sake of operational efficiency and family unity, we have prepared documents that will legally transfer the management rights and the deed of the industrial park into the primary family trust." I looked down at the documents but did not touch them. "Let me make sure I understand this," I said, looking directly at Kevin. "You want me to sign over a commercial asset worth tens of millions of dollars to a family trust that I do not control? And what exactly am I receiving in exchange for this incredibly generous donation?" "Your father is offering you a protective stake in the family legacy," Kevin replied smoothly. "You will be shielded from the liabilities of property management, and the logistics company will be able to restructure its debt without the burden of external rent payments. It is a win for the entire family." "It is daylight robbery," I corrected him flatly. "You are asking me to surrender my property to bail out a failing logistics company because my brother ran it into the ground." Chase slammed his hands on the table, his arrogance instantly giving way to his volatile temper. "You owe us, Jillian," he shouted. "You have been hoarding money for a decade while we provided everything for you. You owe this family your life." This was the exact cue my mother had been waiting for. Linda stood up, her eyes immediately filling with practiced tears. The transition from stern matriarch to wounded victim was seamless. "How can you be so cold?" Linda cried, clutching her hands to her chest. "How can you stand there and refuse to help your own flesh and blood after everything we sacrificed for you? Have you completely forgotten what we went through when you were 19? Have you forgotten the emergency surgery?" I stared at her, feeling a familiar knot of disgust tighten in my stomach. She was deploying her favorite weapon, the appendectomy. Whenever I stepped out of line, whenever I asked for basic respect or boundaries, my mother would inevitably bring up the medical emergency I suffered during my sophomore year of college. It was the ultimate trump card in her arsenal of weaponized guilt. "We dropped everything for you, Linda," sobbed her voice echoing in the boardroom. "You were rushed to the hospital with a ruptured appendix, and we paid $5,000 out of pocket to save your life. We sacrificed our savings to make sure you got the best medical care. We gave you everything we had, and you repay us by trying to evict your own brother." My father nodded solemnly, backing up her performance. "We put family first, Jillian. We did not hesitate to pay your medical bills. Now we are asking you to step up and do the same for the family business. Sign the transfer agreement." I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen a few times, pulling up a specific heavily encrypted file I had stored in my personal cloud drive years ago. I walked slowly around the edge of the mahogany table, the sharp click of my heels cutting through my mother's performative sobs. I stopped right next to Chase and placed the tablet flat on the table, sliding it directly into the center, where everyone could see the bright, high-resolution screen. "You sacrificed everything to pay that $5,000 medical bill?" I asked, looking down at my mother. "Is that your final answer, Mom?" Linda sniffled, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "You know we did. It was a terrible financial strain, but we did it because we love you." I tapped the screen, expanding the document displayed there. "This is a digitized copy of the original hospital billing statement from my emergency appendectomy 15 years ago," I announced, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "And right next to it is a certified bank record from my personal checking account from that exact same month." Kevin the lawyer leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Chase remained perfectly still, his eyes darting between me and the tablet. "You did not pay that bill, Mom," I said, staring directly into her eyes. "You and Dad were on a 2-week luxury cruise in the Bahamas when my appendix ruptured. You refused to fly home early because you said the tickets were non-refundable. The hospital required immediate payment for the uninsured portion of the emergency surgery. I paid that $5,000 bill in full. I paid it using 2 years' worth of waitressing tips that I had saved in a shoebox under my dorm room bed. Linda's mouth dropped open. The tears stopped instantly. I watched the realization hit my father. He looked down at the tablet, seeing the undeniable, irrefutable proof of my payment. The bank routing numbers, the dates, the exact dollar amount, matching the hospital receipt perfectly. You have spent 15 years using a medical emergency to gaslight me into believing I owed you my life. I continued, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch. You built an entire narrative of parental sacrifice around a bill that you explicitly refused to pay. You let me drain my entire life savings at 19 years old to avoid going into medical debt while you were drinking margaritas on a cruise ship. And then you had the sheer psychotic audacity to claim you were the heroes. I looked directly at Kevin, the lawyer, who was currently staring at the torn contract on the table. Kevin, since you are the corporate counsel for this logistics company, I assume you are familiar with the commercial tenant rights outlined in the lease agreement, I asked. Specifically, the clause that grants the property owner the right to conduct a forensic financial audit of the tenant if they fail to remit rental payments for 3 consecutive months. Chase jerked backward in his chair, as if he had been physically struck. The remaining color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. Harrison frowned, looking from me to his lawyer. What are you talking about, Jillian? We have never missed a rent payment. The company pays its operational expenses on time every single month. I smiled, a cold, humorless expression that sent a visible shiver down my brother's spine. Dad, you really need to start checking your own accounting department, I advised softly. Because your golden boy has not paid rent on this building in 90 days. And as your landlord, I exercised my legal right to audit your books last week. I suggest you all sit tight. I brought some very interesting reading material to share with the group. The heavy silence in the boardroom was broken only by the sound of Chase's ragged, panicked breathing. He stood there, chest heaving, waiting for anyone to believe the astronomical lie he had just vomited into the room. He looked at our mother first, his eyes begging her to validate his delusion. Linda's mouth trembled. She took a half step toward him, her maternal instinct fighting a losing battle against basic human logic. Chase, she whispered, her voice fragile. Honey, what are you saying? Your grandfather. He would never. He did, Chase shouted, slamming his hand against the mahogany table. He set me up. He knew I was struggling with the pressure of being vice president, and he used me. He told me the IRS was coming for the corporate accounts. He gave me the routing numbers for the offshore syndicates. He told me to use Brittany's credit cards to wash the capital. It was a tax shelter strategy. I actually had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. Let me get this straight, I said, stepping closer to the table, my voice echoing loudly in the tense space. You want us to believe that Grandpa Thomas, a man who has used the same conservative accounting firm for 40 years, a man who still balances his personal checkbook with a ballpoint pen, orchestrated a highly illegal international money laundering operation through a Caribbean sports betting ring? Yes, Chase insisted, glaring at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. He hates how Dad runs the company. He wanted to hoard the cash for himself. He used me as the fall guy. I turned my gaze to Kevin, the corporate lawyer. Kevin was currently staring at his hands, his face completely devoid of color. As a legal professional, he knew that sitting in a room while an executive confessed to wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion was a career-ending scenario. He slowly began packing his briefcase, making zero eye contact with my father. Kevin, I called out, stopping the lawyer in his tracks. As corporate counsel, how would you rate my brother's defense strategy? Do you think the federal prosecutors will buy my 82-year-old grandfather made me buy a Range Rover to trick the IRS defense? Kevin swallowed hard, zipping his leather briefcase shut. I advise my clients to retain separate criminal defense counsel immediately, Kevin muttered, pushing his chair back. I am officially recusing myself from this matter. Harrison, I will send my formal resignation to your assistant this afternoon. Kevin didn't even look back. He power-walked out of the boardroom, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind him. The rats were officially fleeing the sinking ship. "Wait, Kevin, you can't just leave!" Harrison yelled, half rising from his chair. But the lawyer was gone. I stepped forward and placed my hand firmly on top of the black binder. "This audit is now a legal corporate record," I stated clearly. "As your commercial landlord, I am required to document the financial insolvency of my tenant. The fact that your insolvency is directly tied to felony embezzlement is no longer my problem. It is yours." Linda let out a sharp gasp, rushing forward to grab my arm. "Jillian, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "You can't do this. You can't turn this audit over to the authorities. He's your brother. We are your family. If you submit those records, he will go to federal prison. They will take him away from us." I looked down at her hand gripping my sleeve. I remembered how those same hands had frantically dried the iced tea off Chase's fingers while ignoring my ruined shirt. I remembered how those same hands had signed the check for his Porsche while handing me a bus pass. I calmly reached down and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. "You do not get to invoke the word family to protect a criminal mom," I said coldly. "You sat in this exact room 10 minutes ago and tried to gaslight me into surrendering my entire life's work to bail him out. You weaponized a medical emergency that I paid for myself to try and manipulate me. You don't care about family. You only care about him." "I was trying to save our legacy," Linda cried, gesturing wildly to the room around us. "We built this life for all of us." "No, you built an illusion," I corrected her, "and Chase just burned it to the ground." Chase suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the heavy black binder. He tried to yank it across the table, his eyes wild with a destructive panic. "You can't have this. I'm destroying it. I'm shredding every page." I didn't try to stop him. I just smiled. "Go ahead, Chase," I offered, taking a step back and gesturing to the binder. "Tear it up, burn it, eat the pages if you want to. Do you honestly think a supply chain consultant who specializes in secure data management brought the only copy of a forensic audit to a hostile meeting?" Chase froze his hands, gripping the binder so hard his knuckles turned white. "There are currently 4 encrypted digital copies of that audit," I informed him, watching his last shred of hope evaporate. "One is in my personal server, one is with my lead attorney, one is with my forensic accountant." I paused, letting the silence stretch for maximum impact before dropping the final devastating piece of the puzzle. "And the 4th copy," I said softly, "was hand-delivered to Grandpa Thomas this morning at 8 a.m. Harrison actually staggered backward, catching himself on the edge of the conference table. "You gave it to my father," he choked out. "Of course I did," I replied. "He is the foundational investor of this company. He deserved to know that his grandson is a thief. And more importantly, I wanted to make sure he was fully prepared when Chase inevitably tried to blame him for the embezzlement." Chase dropped the binder. It hit the table with a dull thud. His legs gave out and he collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He let out a low, pathetic sob. He knew exactly what Grandpa Thomas did to people who threatened his money or his reputation. The patriarch of our family was ruthless, and Chase had just falsely accused him of federal tax evasion. "You have 72 hours to vacate my property," I announced, addressing my father. "I am officially executing the early termination clause due to breach of contract and financial insolvency. If your company's inventory is not removed from my industrial park by Friday at 5:00 p.m., I will have the locks changed, seize the assets inside to cover your unpaid rent, and hand this entire mess over to a bankruptcy judge." I picked up my tablet, slipped it into my handbag, and turned toward the boardroom doors. "Jillian, wait," Harrison pleaded, his voice breaking completely. The powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a broken, terrified old man. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll fire him today. I'll sign the company over to you. Just give us time. Don't evict us. Don't destroy everything I've worked for." I stopped at the heavy oak doors, resting my hand on the brass handle. I looked back at the family that had spent 34 years making sure I knew my place at the bottom of their hierarchy. "You did this to yourself, Dad," I said quietly. "You handed a loaded gun to a spoiled child and you're upset that he shot you with it. I'm just the landlord cleaning up the mess." I pushed the doors open and walked out of the corporate headquarters, leaving my family locked inside the tomb of their own ruined legacy. But as I walked to my car, I knew Chase was too desperate, too arrogant, and too accustomed to getting his way to simply surrender. He was going to try one last catastrophic maneuver to save himself, and it would give me exactly what I needed to bury him forever. The inevitable retaliation began less than 12 hours later. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone vibrating violently against my nightstand. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of notifications, missed calls, and text messages from numbers I had not interacted with in years. I sat up in the quiet calm of my apartment, poured myself a glass of water, and opened the primary family group chat. Chase had gone nuclear. Knowing he was rapidly losing his grip on both his fabricated reality and his corporate position, my brother had launched a massive, highly calculated public offensive. He had posted a 7-minute video across all his social media platforms. The link was currently being spammed to every extended family member, family friend, and business associate in our parents' network. I tapped the link and watched the performance of a lifetime. Chase sat on the plush designer sofa in the living room of his heavily mortgaged mansion. He was not wearing his usual expensive tailored suit or flashy watch. Instead, he wore a plain gray sweater, his hair deliberately ruffled to make him look stressed and exhausted. The lighting was soft and dim. He looked directly into the camera and let out a shaky, perfectly timed sigh. For 30 years, our family logistics company has been a pillar of this community. Chase began, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. My father built a legacy of trust and hard work. But today, I have to share some devastating news. My estranged sister Jillian has launched a hostile, illegal takeover to destroy everything my parents have built. I watched in cold fascination as my brother spun a web of absolute fiction. He did not mention his embezzlement. He did not mention the millions of dollars missing from the corporate accounts or his Caribbean sports betting debts. Instead, he painted himself as the exhausted, noble son trying to protect his elderly grandfather from a greedy predator. Jillian has been isolated from us for years because of her own toxic behavior. Chase lied to the camera, actually managing to squeeze a single dramatic tear from his eye. Now she has returned and is manipulating our 82-year-old grandfather. She is taking advantage of his declining mental state, using elder abuse tactics to steal his estate and illegally force our family business onto the street. She sent us an eviction notice yesterday. My parents are devastated. We are fighting back, but we need our community to know the truth. The video ended with a link to a legal defense fund he had undoubtedly just set up to solicit donations from gullible friends. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. He knew he could not beat the forensic audit in a courtroom, so he was trying to win the court of public opinion. He wanted to destroy my reputation before I could destroy his freedom. The collateral damage was instantaneous. My phone screen lit up with a fresh wave of vitriol from the extended family. These were the enablers, the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had happily attended my parents' lavish parties, drank their expensive wine, and never once asked why I was excluded from the family photos. Now armed with Chase's tearful propaganda, they felt completely justified in their self-righteous anger. Aunt Barbara sent a massive block of text calling me a sociopath. She said I was a disgrace to the family name and that my actions would put my father in an early grave. Cousin Greg left a voicemail screaming that I was a gold-digging monster for abusing a helpless old man. Dozens of messages poured in accusing me of cruelty, greed, and elder abuse. They demanded I drop the eviction. They demanded I apologize to Chase. They demanded I return the properties I had allegedly stolen. I took a hot shower dressed in a sharp-tailored black blazer and matching trousers and decided I was not going to let their digital circus disrupt my morning routine. I grabbed my keys and drove down the street to the Daily Grind, my favorite local coffee shop. The shop was a quiet, rustic space, filled with the rich aroma of roasted beans and the low hum of morning commuters. The barista, a college student named Liam, who knew my regular order, greeted me with a warm smile. I paid for my black coffee and stepped back toward the pickup counter, enjoying the calm atmosphere. The piece lasted exactly 4 minutes. The heavy glass door of the coffee shop swung open with a violent crash, the metal bells attached to the handle violently ringing. I did not even need to turn around to know who had just walked in. The chaotic, aggressive energy was unmistakable. It was my mother. Linda marched into the coffee shop, scanning the room with manic intensity. She had clearly tracked my location, likely using a family tracking app I had forgotten to disable on an old shared phone plan. She was not dressed in her usual pristine country club attire. She wore oversized sunglasses and a rumpled trench coat, looking deliberately frantic and disheveled. She spotted me standing by the pickup counter and charged forward. "How could you do this to us?" Linda screamed at the top of her lungs, her shrill voice slicing through the quiet coffee shop like a siren. Every single person in the room froze. Conversations halted instantly. Customers lowered their laptops and coffee mugs, turning their heads to witness the sudden eruption of suburban drama. I did not flinch. I kept my hands resting lightly on the wooden counter, my posture perfectly straight, and slowly turned to face her. Linda stopped a few feet away from me. She threw her oversized sunglasses onto a nearby table, revealing eyes that were red and puffy. She threw her hands in the air, creating a massive theatrical scene designed entirely for the audience of strangers surrounding us. "You are throwing your own father onto the street!" Linda wailed, her voice cracking with forced hysteria. "You are destroying our business. You are stealing from your own grandfather. How do you sleep at night? You are a monster, Jillian." Her public performance had backfired, cementing her image not as a victim, but as a frantic, irrational woman. I took a sip of my black coffee and walked toward my car, my composure absolutely perfect. The social media attacks and the public tantrums were nothing but the dying thrashing of a cornered animal. They were wasting their energy on optics while I was focused on execution. But I knew Chase was not going to stop at social media videos. He was too deep in debt to simply surrender. As I unlocked my car door, my mind was already anticipating his next move, ready to close the trap the second he made his fatal error. I drove straight from the coffee shop to the downtown business district, leaving the suburban melodrama far behind me. The crisp air conditioning of my car matched the absolute clarity in my mind. While my mother was busy performing a hysterical tragedy for an audience of local baristas, and my brother was crying to his social media followers, I was heading to a place where emotions held zero currency. I was heading to a place where power was executed through ink paper and undeniable legal authority. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the sleek glass high-rise that housed my primary commercial law firm. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent and fast. When the polished steel doors opened, I walked past the reception desk with a brief nod and headed directly into the executive conference room. My lead attorney, Bennett, was already standing by the wall of windows, sorting through thick stacks of legal filings. Sitting at the head of the massive glass conference table, holding a cup of black coffee in one hand and a silver pen in the other, was Grandpa Thomas. He had insisted on attending this meeting in person. "You look far too calm for a woman whose face is currently plastered all over the internet," Grandpa Thomas said. His sharp blue eyes gleamed with a mixture of amusement and fierce pride as I took the seat next to him. "I saw the video Chase posted this morning. I must say the boy missed his true calling in Hollywood. That single tear he managed to squeeze out was a masterclass in fiction." I placed my handbag on the table and let out a dry laugh. "Mom just staged a public intervention at the Daily Grind," I told them. "She screamed that I was a monster and told the entire cafe that I was abusing you to steal your estate. I think they are hoping I will die of sheer social embarrassment before the eviction deadline hits." Bennett shook his head, tapping a stack of papers against the glass table to straighten them. "They are deploying a classic distraction strategy," Bennett explained, sliding the first document toward me. "When a corporate entity has no legal defense and no capital, they attack the character of the creditor. They want you exhausted defending your reputation, so you lose focus on the actual objective. Unfortunately for them, the court system does not accept Facebook likes as a valid form of rent payment." I picked up the silver pen. "Exactly," I said. "Let them have the internet. We are taking the building." For the next 2 hours, we bypassed the social media circus entirely and focused strictly on the surgical dismantling of my father's logistics empire. The atmosphere in the room was clinical and devastating. There was no yelling, no throwing of iced tea, no weaponized guilt. This was how real power operated. Bennett walked us through the exact timeline of the commercial eviction. Because the logistics company had failed to pay rent for 90 days, and because I possessed the forensic audit, proving the insolvency was tied to felony embezzlement. The standard grace periods were nullified. The 60-hour notice to vacate was absolute. But I was not just kicking them out. I was ensuring they could not simply set up shop somewhere else. By Friday at 5 in the afternoon, the county sheriffs will arrive at the industrial park, Bennett stated, pointing to a specific clause in the filing. We are executing a landlord's lien on the physical assets located inside the warehouse. That means every single forklift, every piece of racking equipment, every pallet of inventory, and the entire fleet of delivery trucks currently parked on your property will be legally seized to satisfy the 90 days of unpaid rent and the $2 million early termination penalty. They are going to show up to work on Monday and find padlocks on the doors and chains on the steering wheels. I confirmed, feeling a deep, satisfying thrill at the sheer mechanics of the trap. Chase thought he could break my business by threatening to leave. He never realized I could legally hold his entire operational infrastructure hostage. Grandpa Thomas set his coffee cup down and slid a separate folder across the table toward Bennett. And to ensure Harrison cannot secure any last-minute emergency loans to buy his way out of this lien, I am officially pulling my foundational capital. I looked at my grandfather, surprised by the absolute finality in his voice. You are completely severing your ties with the company today. Grandpa Thomas nodded, his expression turning hard and uncompromising. I built that logistics company with my own 2 hands, Jillian. I spent 40 years making it a respected pillar of this industry. Harrison took my legacy and handed it to a lazy, entitled thief because he was too obsessed with maintaining the image of a perfect golden son. I will not allow my name or my money to be associated with a criminal enterprise. The withdrawal documents are signed. As of this afternoon, the corporate accounts will be frozen pending the withdrawal of my backing. Harrison is officially bankrupt. The checkmate was flawless. We had sealed every possible exit. Chase could not run. Harrison could not borrow. Linda could not manipulate her way out of a frozen bank account. The empire they had used to make me feel small and worthless for my entire life was evaporating into thin air with a few strokes of a pen. Bennett gathered the signed eviction notices and the asset seizure requests, sliding them into a crisp manila envelope. I will have the process servers deliver these to the corporate headquarters immediately, Bennett said. The 60-hour countdown officially begins the moment these touch your brother's desk. I leaned back in my leather chair, feeling a profound sense of peace. The storm was raging outside, but I was sitting in the eye of the hurricane, perfectly safe and completely in control. The lifelong war with my family was finally drawing to a close, or so I thought. Just as Bennett was reaching for the intercom to call his assistant, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the glass table. I glanced down, expecting to see another barrage of hateful text messages from an angry aunt or a delusional cousin. But the caller ID did not show a family member. It showed the automated fraud department of my primary commercial bank, the same bank that held the operational accounts for my real estate holding company. A cold spike of adrenaline hit my chest. I snatched the phone off the table and answered immediately. "This is Jillian," I said, my voice tight. An automated voice confirmed my identity before instantly routing me to a live fraud prevention specialist. Ms. Jillian, the agent said, her tone urgent and professional. "We are calling to verify a highly irregular transaction that was just authorized against your primary LLC. Our system flagged a massive commercial bridge loan originating from a high-risk secondary lending institution. The funds were just dispersed." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, pressing the phone hard against my ear. "I did not authorize any commercial loans today. I have not applied for a bridge loan in over 5 years. What is the total amount of the disbursement?" The fraud agent paused for a fraction of a second. $3.5 million, ma'am. It was authorized as an emergency corporate bridge loan, and the hard collateral listed on the application was the entire equity of your commercial real estate portfolio. The air in the conference room seemed to vanish. Grandpa Thomas and Bennett were staring at me, both instantly recognizing the shock radiating across my face. "Cancel it," I ordered, my voice rising in panic. "Freeze the transaction immediately. It is fraudulent." "I am looking at the origination file now," the agent continued, her fingers rapidly typing on her end of the line. "The secondary lender approved the loan because it was authorized in person." The applicant provided your original physical Social Security card, your authentic birth certificate, and the original physical incorporation documents for your LLC. They used your exact personal identity to act as the primary guarantor for a massive corporate cash injection. I stopped breathing. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with terrifying, violent clarity. When I was 18 years old, right before I moved out of my parents' house to go to college, my father had insisted on keeping my vital documents in the massive fireproof safe hidden in the master bedroom. He claimed it was for my own protection. When they disowned me and kicked me out, I had been so desperate and panicked that I left those original documents behind. I had eventually ordered replacements and built my business using digital copies, completely forgetting about the physical paperwork locked away in that suburban safe. But I remembered something else. I remembered that Chase knew the combination to that safe. He used to brag about stealing cash from it when we were teenagers. Chase had not just been crying on social media this morning. The tearful video, the public defamation, the hysterical scene my mother caused at the coffee shop, it was all a coordinated distraction. While I was focused on the public circus Chase had quietly driven to a predatory high-interest secondary lender. He had walked in with my stolen Social Security card, my birth certificate, and my old LLC filings. I knew my real estate portfolio was worth tens of millions. He had fraudulently assumed my identity to leverage my own properties as collateral for a $3.5 million emergency loan. He needed that exact amount of cash to instantly pay off the $2 million lease penalty and quietly cover the remainder of his offshore embezzlement debts before the authorities could freeze him out. He had literally stolen my financial identity to bail himself out of prison, using my own life's work to pay his ransom. Miss Jillian, the fraud agent, asked, breaking through my horrifying realization. Do you know who might have access to these highly sensitive original documents? I looked across the glass table at my grandfather. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a blinding, absolute rage that eclipsed anything I had ever felt in my entire life. Chase thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted me, financially ruined me, and trapped me under a mountain of insurmountable high-interest debt. Yes, I know exactly who has them, I told the fraud agent, my voice dropping to a lethal frozen whisper. I need you to lock down every single account connected to my name, I instructed. And then I need you to transfer me directly to your federal wire fraud division. My brother just committed felony identity theft, and I am going to make sure he never sees the outside of a prison cell again. I ended the call with the Federal Wire Fraud Division after providing them with the exact physical address of the secondary lending institution and my brother's current location. Bennett and Grandpa Thomas sat in the conference room in absolute silence as I finalized the lockdown of my compromised LLC. The sheer gravity of Chase's crime had shifted the atmosphere from a strategic corporate eviction to an active federal criminal investigation. Chase had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He had forged my signature on federal lending documents and used stolen Social Security credentials to secure $3.5 million. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had trapped me under a mountain of insurmountable high-interest debt, leaving me no choice but to drop the eviction to save my own credit. I was fundamentally incapable of understanding that a woman who built her own empire would never simply absorb his catastrophic failures. I thanked Bennett, and my grandfather gathered my things and drove straight back to my secure high-rise apartment. I knew exactly what was coming next. The secondary lender would have immediately frozen the disbursement the moment my fraud claim was filed. Chase would have been standing at the bank teller window or refreshing his corporate accounts, waiting for the millions to drop, only to find a locked screen and a fraud alert. And when Chase panicked, he always ran directly to our parents. I did not have to wait long. 2 hours later, the intercom panel on my apartment wall buzzed with an aggressive, frantic rhythm. I walked over and pulled up the security camera feed. My mother and father were standing in the lobby. Linda was pacing back and forth, wringing her hands, while Harrison leaned heavily against the polished marble wall, looking like he had aged a decade in the span of an afternoon. I pressed the button to unlock the lobby doors and left my own front door slightly ajar. I walked into my kitchen, poured a glass of ice water, and hit the record button on my phone, resting it face down on the granite counter. In my state, recording a conversation requires only the consent of one party, and I was more than willing to consent to whatever they were about to say. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by my front door swinging wide open. Harrison and Linda rushed into my living room. They looked completely unhinged. The performative outrage my mother had displayed at the coffee shop was entirely gone. The arrogant corporate posturing my father relied on had evaporated. They were cornered, desperate and terrified. "Jillian, please!" Linda cried out, rushing toward the kitchen counter, her hands reaching out as if to grab me. "You have to stop the bank. You have to call them back right now and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized the loan." I took a deliberate step backward, ensuring the kitchen island remained a physical barrier between us. "I am not going to call federal investigators and lie about authorizing a $3.5 million fraudulent loan. Mom," I said, my voice perfectly flat. "Chase stole my identity. He broke into your home safe, took my original social security card, and committed wire fraud. He is a criminal." Linda let out a horrible, ragged sob. "He is your brother!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of my apartment. "He was desperate. You pushed him into a corner with that eviction notice. He did not know what else to do. He was just trying to save the family business. I was going to pay the loan back. I swear to you he was going to pay it back. You cannot let them arrest him, Jillian. If you press charges, you will ruin his life. You will destroy his future." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, analyzing the sheer magnitude of her delusion. "He ruined his own life, Mom," I corrected her coldly. "He embezzled millions of dollars to fund his gambling addiction. When I caught him, he decided the best solution was to steal my identity and mortgage my entire life's work to cover his tracks. He was willing to let me shoulder millions in high-interest debt just to save his own skin. And you have the absolute audacity to stand in my home and blame me for pushing him into a corner." Harrison stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Linda's shoulder to pull her back. He looked at me with bloodshot eyes, his chest heaving under his wrinkled suit jacket. He knew that crying and screaming would not work on me. He realized he needed to approach this as a business transaction. "Jillian, we know he crossed a line," Harrison said, his voice shaking with a desperate, unnatural calm. "We know what he did is unforgivable. But if this goes to the police, it will be a public scandal. The investors will flee. The logistics company will be seized by the federal government. Chase will go to federal prison. Our entire family name will be a disgrace." I took a slow sip of my ice water. "Your family name is already a disgrace, Dad. You just spent the morning trying to publicly convince the entire community that I was an abusive monster. Why should I care about your public scandal?" Harrison swallowed hard, his eyes darting around my pristine apartment before locking back onto mine. "Because I am willing to make you an offer," he stated, his voice dropping to a low, urgent pitch. "A highly lucrative offer. If you call the bank back, if you tell them you authorize the LLC to take on that loan, and you let Chase walk away cleanly, your mother and I will compensate you." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious to see how low he would sink. "Compensate me with what, Dad? Your company is bankrupt. Your corporate accounts are frozen." Grandpa Thomas pulled his backing. "You have absolutely zero liquid capital." "I know," Harrison replied quickly, licking his dry lips. "But we still own the family estate in Chicago free and clear. It is worth at least $4 million. If you take responsibility for Chase's loan today, your mother and I will legally sign the deed to the family home over to you tomorrow morning. We will give you the house, Jillian, all of it. Just drop the fraud charges." The silence in my apartment became absolute. I looked at my father and then at my mother. Linda was nodding vigorously, tears streaming down her cheeks, completely, entirely supportive of this horrifying transaction. The systemic betrayal of my family had finally reached its ultimate terrifying peak. I stood there processing the sheer magnitude of what they were asking me to do. They were asking me to confess to a massive financial transaction I did not make. They were asking me to assume $3.5 million of toxic predatory debt. They were asking me to risk my own pristine commercial credit, my businesses, and my professional reputation. They were willing to give up the very roof over their own heads, the sprawling suburban mansion they loved more than anything in the world, just to ensure that the golden child did not have to face the consequences of a federal crime. They were literally offering to sacrifice their own home and completely destroy my future just to keep Chase out of handcuffs. They viewed me as nothing more than a shield, a disposable asset designed solely to absorb the impact of his catastrophic failures. I felt a cold, sharp clarity settle over my mind. For 34 years, I had wondered if there was any limit to their favoritism. I had wondered if there was any line they would not cross for him. Today, they had given me my answer. There was no line. There was no limit. They would gladly watch me burn to the ground if it meant keeping Chase warm. I looked down at my phone resting on the counter, the red recording symbol pulsing steadily, capturing every single word of their bribery and extortion. I looked back up at my parents. "You want to give me the family house?" I asked, my tone dangerously soft. "You want me to take on millions in fraudulent debt to protect a man who just committed identity theft against me?" "Yes," Harrison pleaded, stepping closer. "Yes, Jillian, just take the house and let him go. We can handle the debt transfer through private channels. No one else ever has to know." I picked up my phone from the counter and stopped the recording. I saved the audio file directly to my secure cloud server. I looked at the two people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. "I am not taking your house, Dad," I said, my voice ringing with absolute uncompromising authority. "And I am not dropping the charges. I am going to let him burn." The color drained from my father's face so fast, he looked as though he might physically collapse onto the hardwood floor. His eyes darted from my face to the phone in my hand, and the horrific realization finally took root in his mind. He had just confessed to a conspiracy to cover up federal wire fraud, and he had done it on a crystal-clear digital recording. Linda let out a high-pitched shriek. She lunged forward, her manicured hands grasping desperately across the granite island, trying to snatch the phone from my grip. I simply took a half-step back, slipping the device safely into the pocket of my blazer. "Give that to me," Linda screamed, her voice cracking with pure panic. "You cannot do this, Jillian. We are your parents. You cannot send that audio to the police." "I already uploaded it to my secure cloud server," I informed her, my voice carrying the chill of a winter storm. "Even if you smash this phone into 1,000 pieces, the evidence is already out of my hands. It is over, Mom. You chose to protect a criminal, and now you get to face the consequences alongside him." Harrison stumbled backward, leaning heavily against the stainless steel refrigerator. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world disintegrate. And in a very real legal sense, he had. "Get out of my apartment," I ordered, pointing directly at the front door. "Both of you get out right now before I call building security and have you dragged out for trespassing." "Jillian, please," Harrison begged, his voice reduced to a pathetic hoarse whisper. "We will give you anything. Name your price." "I do not want your money, Dad," I said, my tone echoing with absolute finality. "I want justice. Now get out." They had no leverage left. They had no threats, no bribes, and no power. Stripped of their parental authority, they turned and shuffled toward the door like broken, empty shells. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, sealing them out of my life for good. I did not waste a single second. I grabbed my briefcase, grabbed my keys, and headed straight back to the underground parking garage. My lead attorney, Bennett, was already waiting for me at the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Because Chase had committed wire fraud across state lines using a federally insured secondary lending institution, this was no longer a simple local police matter. This was a massive federal crime. Walking into that federal building felt like crossing a massive threshold. I sat in a sterile, brightly lit interview room with Bennett and two sharp-eyed federal financial fraud investigators. I laid everything out on the metal table. The original forensic audit proving the embezzlement. The automated fraud alert logs from my commercial bank. The forged origination documents the secondary lender had sent over. And finally, I placed my phone on the table and played the audio recording of my parents attempting to bribe me into covering up the crime. The lead investigator, a stern woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, listened to the entire recording without blinking. When the audio finished, she looked at the mountain of irrefutable paper evidence and gave a slow, firm nod. "Your brother made a catastrophic mistake, Ms. Miller," the investigator stated, gathering the files into a thick manila folder. He used your exact identity to secure millions of dollars, and he left a paper trail a mile long. We have the bank coordinates. We have the fraudulent wire routing numbers. And thanks to this recording, we have proof of his criminal intent and his accomplices. How fast can you move? Bennett asked, folding his hands on the table. My client's commercial portfolio is currently locked down, but we need the individual apprehended before he attempts to flee or destroy any further corporate records. The investigator stood up, a grim professional determination settling over her features. We are dispatching agents right now. Where is he currently located? I pulled up the social media app on my phone. While my parents had been having their meltdown in my apartment, Chase had been busy celebrating what he assumed was his absolute victory. He had posted a photo just 30 minutes ago. He is at the Oak Ridge Country Club, I replied, sliding the phone across the table so the agents could see the geographical tag. He is hosting a lunch in the main dining room. He thinks the $3.5 million is clearing into his account right now. The investigator nodded. We will handle it from here. Across town, at the highly exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club. Chase was completely oblivious to the hurricane currently speeding toward him. He sat at a large round table positioned perfectly in the center of the elite dining room, surrounded by his wealthy, arrogant friends. He was wearing a fresh designer polo shirt, holding a glass of expensive aged scotch, and laughing loudly at a joke someone had just made. He felt invincible. He genuinely believed his frantic morning visit to the predatory lender had worked. He thought he had stolen my identity, secured the millions, paid off his explosive debts, and trapped me into silence. He kept checking his phone, refreshing his banking app, waiting for the massive deposit to show up in his corporate ledger. Every time it showed a zero balance, he simply assumed it was a standard processing delay. He took another sip of scotch, totally unaware that the zero balance was actually a federal freeze. The dining room of the country club was filled with the low, sophisticated hum of wealthy patrons enjoying their afternoon meals. Waiters in crisp white shirts glided across the carpeted floor carrying silver trays. It was a space designed entirely for comfort, privilege, and exclusion. It was the exact environment my family used to measure their self-worth. That quiet, sophisticated hum was abruptly shattered by the heavy thud of heavy tactical boots marching across the pristine hardwood lobby. 4 federal agents wearing dark suits and prominent tactical vests strode directly into the main dining room. They were accompanied by 2 uniformed local police officers. They did not stop at the host stand. They did not wait to be seated. They moved with a terrifying synchronized purpose, cutting straight through the maze of white tablecloths. The entire dining room went dead silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. The wealthy elite patrons stared in absolute shock as law enforcement stormed their sacred sanctuary. Chase looked up from his phone just as the lead agent stopped directly behind his chair. Chase Miller, the federal agent, asked, his voice booming with authority that commanded the entire room. Chase blinked, his arrogant smile slowly sliding off his face. He looked at the badges, then at the guns, then at the stern, unyielding faces of the officers surrounding his table. The glass of scotch trembled in his hand. Yes, he squeaked, his voice cracking under the sudden immense pressure. What is this about? The lead agent did not hesitate. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back. You are being placed under arrest for felony identity theft, federal wire fraud, and grand larceny. The words dropped like concrete blocks into the dead silent dining room. Chase's friends, the wealthy executives he had been trying to impress for years, physically backed away from the table. They looked at him as if he had suddenly contracted a highly contagious disease. Their expressions shifted from confusion to sheer, undeniable disgust. Wait, Chase stammered, panic completely overriding his senses. No, this is a mistake. I did not steal anything. My sister authorized it. Jillian authorized the loan. You have to call her. She will tell you. You have the right to remain silent. The agent recited, completely ignoring Chase's frantic lies, as he grabbed my brother's arm and hauled him out of his plush leather chair. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Chase tried to pull away, but a second officer immediately grabbed his other arm. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs, snapping shut, echoed loudly across the silent room. The sound was final, absolute, and utterly devastating. Dad Chase screamed, his voice hitting a hysterical pitch as the reality of his destruction finally caught up to him. Call my dad. Call the company lawyer. This is a misunderstanding. I am the vice president. You cannot do this to me. No one stepped forward to help him. The club manager stood frozen near the kitchen doors. His friends stared at their plates, refusing to make eye contact. The golden child, the man who had been handed the world on a silver platter, was being publicly aggressively dismantled in front of the very society he worshipped. The agents turned him around and marched him straight through the center of the dining room. Every single patron watched him do the perpetrator walk of shame. His designer clothes and expensive watch could not hide the fact that he was a common thief being hauled off to a federal holding cell. His public image, his reputation, his entire curated identity was completely permanently obliterated in front of the entire community. I sat in my apartment watching the local news alert pop up on my phone just an hour later. The headline read, "Local Logistics Executive Arrested in Country Club Fraud Sting." I locked my phone, set it on the granite counter, and took a deep, calming breath. The trap had snapped shut with flawless precision, and there was absolutely no escape. I walked straight from the federal building back to my car, leaving the panic of the morning far behind me. The crisp air conditioning matched the absolute clarity in my mind. While my mother was busy performing a hysterical tragedy for an audience of local baristas, and my brother was crying to his social media followers, I was heading to a place where emotions held zero currency. I was heading to a place where power was executed through ink paper and undeniable legal authority. 3 days passed. The arrest of a prominent logistics executive at an exclusive country club did not stay quiet. The local business community was buzzing. My father Harrison hosted his annual shareholder and investor gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel in downtown Chicago. Canceling the event was never an option for him. In his mind, canceling meant admitting defeat. He firmly believed that if he poured enough champagne and hired a good enough string quartet, he could simply distract his investors from the fact that his vice president had just been hauled out of a dining room in handcuffs. The ballroom was a masterpiece of corporate illusion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of perfectly arranged tables. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos circulated with silver trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. The floral centerpieces were massive displays of white orchids designed to project stability and limitless wealth. But the atmosphere in the room was anything but stable. The local business community is a small world, and news of a federal wire fraud arrest travels fast. The investors were not there to celebrate. They were there demanding answers. They huddled in tight groups, whispering nervously and glancing toward the main stage. I knew Chase was in the building. He had posted bail 24 hours after his arrest using the last remaining shreds of his wife Brittany's personal savings. But he was not working the room. He was not shaking hands or flashing his arrogant smile. He was hiding in the darkest corner of the ballroom, standing near the kitchen service doors, looking like a frightened ghost. His designer suit hung loosely on his frame. He kept his head down, terrified to make eye contact with the very people he had spent years trying to impress. The golden child had become a radioactive liability. Linda was trying her best to perform her usual duties as the matriarch. She wore a stunning emerald green gown and a diamond necklace fluttering from table to table with a fixed, desperate smile. I could easily picture her telling the wives of the board members that the entire ordeal was just a silly clerical error. I knew she was spinning a fictional tale about how her son was completely innocent and the police had simply made a terrible mistake. But nobody was buying it. The smiles she received in return were strained and pitying. At precisely 8 o'clock, my father Harrison walked onto the main stage and approached the podium. He adjusted his silk tie and leaned into the microphone, projecting his best authoritative CEO voice. "Good evening, everyone!" Harrison boomed, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "I want to thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate another incredible year for our logistics company. I know there have been some rumors circulating in the press over the past few days. I want to address them directly so we can put them behind us and focus on the future." I was standing just outside the heavy double doors of the ballroom, listening to his speech through the slightly cracked opening. I was dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit holding a sleek leather portfolio. I was not there as a supportive daughter. I was there as the primary creditor and the legal landlord of his entire corporate operation. What you read in the news was nothing more than a temporary family dispute. Harrison lied, smoothly gripping the edges of the podium. It was a minor internal misunderstanding regarding some complex financial paperwork. My son Chase is fully cooperating with the authorities to clear up this clerical error. Let me assure you, our legal team has the situation completely under control. A low murmur rippled through the crowd of investors. They were businessmen. They knew that federal agents do not raid country clubs over minor clerical errors. But more importantly, Harrison continued raising his voice to speak over the whispers. I stand before you tonight to guarantee that the financial foundation of this company has never been stronger. Our operating capital is secure. Our supply chain partnerships are thriving. We are positioned for record-breaking growth in the upcoming quarter. I give you my personal word as your CEO that your investments are safe and our legacy is rock solid. He paused for applause. A few loyal board members clapped politely, but the majority of the room remained dead silent. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Harrison forced a confident smile and opened the floor. Now I would be happy to take a few brief questions regarding our upcoming expansion plans, Harrison offered, gesturing to the crowd. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped into the ballroom. The timing was immaculate. The heavy click of the door mechanism drew the attention of the guests standing near the back of the room. Heads began to turn. Conversations stopped. As I walked down the center aisle, the crowd naturally parted for me. I did not rush. I walked with slow, deliberate purpose, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor that separated the carpeted seating areas. I watched my mother Linda spot me from across the room. The fixed smile slid right off her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She took a step toward me, her hands reaching out as if she could physically block me from moving forward, but the crowd of investors was too thick. She was trapped behind a table of minor shareholders forced to watch me approach the stage. Harrison saw the crowd parting. He shaded his eyes against the bright stage lights, trying to see who was causing the disruption. When his gaze finally locked onto me, his hands gripped the podium so hard his knuckles turned stark white. The confident, powerful CEO facade shattered in an instant. He looked exactly like what he was, a desperate liar who had just been caught. I stopped right at the front of the stage, standing directly in front of the primary investor tables. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at Chase hiding in the shadows. I looked only at the man who had spent 34 years telling me I was a disappointment. I have a question regarding your financial foundation. Harrison, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent ballroom without the need for a microphone. You just assured these investors that your operating capital is secure. Could you please explain how that is possible when you have failed to pay rent on your primary commercial facility for 90 consecutive days? A loud collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The lead investors sitting at the front tables sat up straight, staring at my father with sudden intense scrutiny. Jillian Harrison stammered, his voice dropping to a panicked hiss. What are you doing? This is a private corporate event. You need to leave right now. Security. I held up a hand, silencing his pathetic attempt to have me removed. I am not a trespasser, Dad. I replied, my tone completely devoid of familial warmth. I am the legal owner and landlord of the Oak Street Industrial Park. I am the sole proprietor of the commercial property that houses your entire corporate infrastructure. I am here legally executing my rights as your primary creditor. The lead investor, a stern man named Richard, who had backed my father for 2 decades, stood up from his chair. He looked at me and then glared at Harrison. Harrison, what is she talking about? Richard demanded, his voice rough with anger. Are you defaulting on the corporate lease? You just stood there and told us the financials were stronger than ever. Harrison opened his mouth to lie again, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the faces of his investors, realizing that the truth was standing right in front of them, holding a leather portfolio full of evidence. He was completely trapped. My father tried to salvage the unsalvageable. Richard, please, he begged, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. We are restructuring our assets. My daughter is just upset about a personal matter, and she is blowing a simple delayed payment out of proportion. We have the capital to cover the lease. No, you do not, I corrected him, turning to face the investors directly. My father does not have the capital to cover the lease because his vice president, his son Chase, actively embezzled millions of dollars from the corporate operating accounts to fund his personal gambling debts. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Investors began shouting questions at the stage. Board members scrambled for their phones. Linda covered her face with her hands, letting out a loud theatrical sob that no one paid attention to. Chase shrank further into the shadows, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. I unzipped my leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of printed documents. These were not emotional accusations. They were certified legal facts. I am distributing copies of a formal forensic audit that I conducted on this company last week, I announced, handing the first packet directly to Richard, the lead investor. The audit traces the stolen funds directly to offshore accounts controlled by Chase. Furthermore, I am distributing copies of the 60-hour eviction notice that was legally served to this company yesterday morning. I handed out the remaining packets to the other major shareholders, watching their faces turn red with fury as they read the undeniable proof of my father's negligence and my brother's crimes. By 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon, the county sheriffs will arrive at the warehouse to execute a landlord's lien. I continued, my voice rising clearly over the shouting crowd. Every single piece of equipment, every delivery truck, and every pallet of inventory will be legally seized to satisfy the unpaid rent and the $2 million early termination penalty. This company is not experiencing record-breaking growth. This company is actively facing total liquidation. Harrison looked like he was going to vomit. He stepped back from the podium, his chest heaving as he stared at the angry mob of investors he had just tried to deceive. He had nothing left to say. He had no lies left to spin. He was watching his entire life's work go up in flames. The silence that followed my announcement was not the quiet of a peaceful room. It was the breathless vacuum that occurs right before an explosion. Richard, the lead investor, stared at the thick packet I had just placed in his hands. His eyes scanned the first page, taking in the official seal of the forensic accounting firm and the undeniable highlighted figures showing millions of dollars bleeding out of the corporate accounts. He flipped to the second page, then the third. The color drained from his face, rapidly replaced by a dark, terrifying flush of absolute fury. I did not stop moving. I walked methodically along the edge of the primary tables, distributing the remaining legal packets to the other major shareholders. I moved with the precision of a woman handing out meeting agendas in a standard Tuesday morning board meeting. My tone remained chillingly corporate, completely devoid of the familial hysteria my mother so frequently relied upon. Page 4 of that packet contains the bank routing numbers your vice president used to siphon your investment capital into a Caribbean sports betting syndicate. I instructed, my voice carrying effortlessly over the rising murmurs of the panicked crowd. Page 7 contains the official 60-hour notice to vacate the premises, which was served yesterday morning. As of right now, you are investing in a logistics company that has no capital, no warehouse, and by Friday afternoon, no operational fleet. Richard slammed the packet down onto the white tablecloth, knocking over his crystal water glass. The water spilled across the table, soaking into the expensive floral centerpieces, but no one cared. Harrison, what the hell is this? Richard roared, his voice booming across the ballroom. You stood up there and swore on your personal honor that our investments were secure. You looked us in the eye and said your son was dealing with a simple clerical error. My father opened his mouth, his hands trembling as he reached out toward the investors. Richard, please, you have to understand, he pleaded, his voice cracking pathetically. We were going to fix it. We were securing a bridge loan to cover the missing funds. The company is still viable. We just need a few weeks to reorganize our assets. That was the exact opening I had been waiting for. I turned back to face the crowd, folding my hands neatly in front of me. Hai is correct about the bridge loan, I announced, ensuring every single person in the room heard me clearly. My father and my brother did attempt to secure a $3.5 million emergency commercial loan to cover up this massive embezzlement. However, they failed to mention exactly how they went about securing it. I turned my gaze toward the back of the ballroom, searching the shadows near the kitchen service doors. I spotted Chase trying to shrink behind a group of terrified catering staff. "Chase, please do not hide in the dark," I called out, my voice dripping with lethal professional courtesy. "You are the vice president of this company. Step forward and tell your investors how you tried to save them. Tell them about the brilliant financial strategy you executed yesterday morning." Chase did not move. He stood completely frozen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The entire ballroom turned to follow my gaze. Hundreds of wealthy, elite Chicago business owners shifted their attention to the golden child, cowering by the kitchen doors. Since the vice president is suddenly suffering from a lack of transparency, I will brief the board. I continued, turning back to the investors. Yesterday morning, my brother broke into our parents' home safe. He stole my original Social Security card and my birth certificate. He then walked into a secondary lending institution and fraudulently assumed my identity to leverage my personal commercial real estate portfolio as collateral for that emergency bridge loan. The gasps that rippled through the room were audible. Several board members physically recoiled from the stage, looking at my father as if he were a monster. "I did not just embezzle your money," I stated, letting the absolute weight of the crime settle over the room. "He committed felony identity theft and federal wire fraud to cover his tracks." The clerical error my father referenced tonight was actually my brother being arrested by federal agents and hauled out of the Oak Ridge Country Club in handcuffs while he was eating lunch. He is currently standing in the back of this room on federal bail. The ballroom erupted. It was a scene of total catastrophic corporate collapse. Investors were shouting at my father, demanding their money back. Board members were furiously dialing their private attorneys. The pristine, elegant gala had transformed into a hostile mob. Harrison stumbled backward, bumping into the wooden podium. He looked like a man who had just been hit by a freight train. His entire legacy, his reputation, his wealth, and his golden son were completely permanently destroyed in less than 5 minutes. But the execution was not quite finished. Just as the chaos reached its peak, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open one final time. The loud mechanical click cut through the shouting. The crowd near the entrance parted instinctively, stepping aside to make way. Rolling through the center aisle, navigating the chaotic sea of panicked investors, was my Grandpa Thomas. I was pushed in his wheelchair by his trusted driver, Thomas, but his posture was as rigid and commanding as a 4-star general. Despite being 82 years old, he possessed a presence that demanded absolute respect. The noise in the room began to die down as people recognized the founding patriarch of the logistics empire, the man who had built the very company that was currently burning to the ground. Grandpa Thomas did not look at the investors. He did not look at my mother, who was trembling behind a table. He kept his sharp blue eyes locked directly on his son, Harrison. "Bring me to the stage," Grandpa Thomas instructed his driver. The driver pushed the wheelchair up the side ramp and positioned my grandfather directly next to me. He reached out and grabbed the microphone, pulling it down from the podium stand. The screech of audio feedback echoed through the room, silencing the last remaining whispers. "For 40 years, I built this company on a foundation of integrity and hard work." Grandpa Thomas began, his voice gravelly and vibrating with a slow, burning fury. "I handed the reins to my son, believing he would protect the legacy of our family and honor the trust of the men and women who invested their hard-earned capital into our vision. Instead, I have lived long enough to watch him hand my life's work to a lazy, entitled thief." "Dad, please," Harrison begged, dropping to his knees on the stage. His expensive suit crumpled as he looked up at his father with tears streaming down his face. "We can rebuild. I will fire Chase. I will give you back control of the board. Please do not do this in front of everyone." "You do not have a board left to control, Harrison," my grandfather stated coldly, "because as of this afternoon, I have officially instructed my legal team to sever all foundational financial backing from this corporation. I am pulling every single dollar of my operational capital. This company is dead." Harrison let out a gut-wrenching sob, burying his face in his hands. But Grandpa Thomas was not finished. He turned to face the silent, captivated audience of elites. "A man who allows his son to steal from his investors and then attempts to sacrifice his daughter to cover up the crime is no son of mine." Grandpa Thomas declared, his voice echoing with absolute finality. I am publicly and permanently disowning Harrison and Chase. They are stripped of the family name and removed from my estate. He reached over and placed his weathered hand firmly over mine. Everything I have built, every asset, every account, and every shred of my remaining legacy has been legally transferred into a blind holding company, he announced proudly. A holding company exclusively owned and operated by my granddaughter Jillian. She is the only person in this bloodline who actually earned her success. She is the true heir to my legacy. The transfer of power was absolute. In front of the entire business community, my grandfather had crowned me the victor and banished my father and brother to the wasteland of total financial ruin. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My mother Linda finally broke through the crowd of frozen investors. Her stunning emerald green gown dragged across the floor as she rushed toward the front of the stage. Her perfect, carefully curated social image was entirely shattered. The country club friends she had spent decades trying to impress were currently staring at her with blatant, undisguised disgust. She reached the edge of the stage and physically collapsed. She fell hard to her knees, her diamond necklace glittering under the harsh stage lights as she looked up at me. "Jillian, please." Linda wailed, her voice cracking as tears ruined her face. "You have won. You proved your point. Please give us the house. Please just drop the fraud charges against your brother. We have nothing left. We are going to lose everything. Do not do this to us." I stood on the stage holding the deed to the building, controlling the fate of their company, and possessing the entire wealth of my grandfather's estate. I looked down at the woman who had spent 34 years treating me like an unwanted burden. I looked at her kneeling on the floor begging for mercy in front of hundreds of silent judging elites. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at her with the exact same cold indifference she had shown me my entire life. "I am not doing anything to you, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "I am just letting you reap exactly what you sowed." I turned my back on my kneeling mother, offered my arm to my grandfather, and together we walked off the stage, leaving the golden child and his enablers to burn in the ashes of their own ruined empire. 3 months passed with the absolute brutal efficiency of a falling guillotine. The shockwaves from the Grand Plaza Hotel Gala did not just ripple through the Chicago business district, they completely leveled it. When you build an entire life on a foundation of lies and stolen money, the collapse is not a slow decline, it is a catastrophic freefall. I sat in my corner office looking out over the city skyline, holding the final court transcripts in my hands. The federal justice system does not care about your country club membership. They do not care that your mother thinks you are a golden child. When you commit felony identity theft and wire fraud across state lines using a federally insured secondary lending institution, the hammer comes down hard. Chase was formally convicted. His high-priced defense attorney tried every trick in the book, but you cannot argue with a pristine forensic audit and a crystal-clear audio recording of a conspiracy to cover up the crime. The judge showed zero leniency for a privileged executive who tried to ruin his sister to fund his gambling addiction. Chase was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. I attended the sentencing hearing simply to watch the reality finally crash over him. He stood before the judge wearing a shapeless standard-issue jumpsuit stripped of his tailored blazers and imported Italian loafers. The arrogant smirk that had defined his entire 30 years of existence was entirely gone. He looked small, weak, and utterly terrified. He actually cried in the courtroom, begging the judge for leniency, citing his Ivy League education and his family name as reasons he did not belong behind bars. The judge coldly replied that a Yale degree simply meant he was smart enough to know exactly how much damage he was causing. Chase turned his head to look at the gallery, searching for someone to save him. But there was no one left to save him. The most poetic justice of his entire downfall was his wife, Brittany. Chase had spent years embezzling corporate funds to keep her dripping in designer brands, to fund her luxury shopping sprees, and to buy her loyalty. He genuinely believed that flashing stolen wealth made him a king. But loyalty bought with stolen money evaporates the exact second the accounts freeze. The morning after Chase was arrested in the middle of the country club dining room, Brittany went to use her platinum corporate credit card at a high-end boutique. It declined. She tried a second card. declined. Within 24 hours, she had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and financial abuse. She did not visit him in the holding cell. She did not attend his hearings. She packed her expensive bags, cleaned out whatever minor personal joint accounts were not immediately seized by federal investigators, and vanished entirely. She left the golden child absolutely alone to face his sentencing, without a single person sitting behind him in the gallery. The logistics company followed Chase straight into the abyss. True to my word, I did not give my father a single inch of breathing room. At exactly 5 o'clock on that Friday afternoon, the county sheriffs arrived at the Oak Street Industrial Park. I sat in my parked car across the street watching the execution of my landlord's lien. It was a flawless tactical operation. The sheriffs locked the heavy iron gates. They chained the steering wheels of the entire delivery fleet. They legally seized every single forklift, every pallet of inventory, and every piece of office furniture to satisfy the 90 days of unpaid rent and the massive early termination penalty Chase had foolishly triggered. Harrison actually drove to the warehouse and stood in the parking lot trying to plead with the sheriffs. I watched him waving his arms, pointing at the building, screaming that he was the CEO and demanding they stop. The officers simply handed him the court order and told him to step off the property. He had no capital to fight it. With Grandpa Thomas pulling his foundational backing and transferring his estate to my holding company, the corporate accounts were nothing but a barren wasteland. The logistics company bled out in a matter of days. Harrison officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy less than a month later. The empire he had used to measure his worth, the company he had weaponized to bludgeon my self-esteem for decades, was legally dissolved and sold off for scraps to cover a mountain of insurmountable debt. But the ultimate reckoning fell upon my parents personally. Harrison and Linda had stood in my apartment and offered to give me the family home if I would just take the fall for Chase's crimes. They tried to use their sprawling suburban mansion as a bribe. They lost it anyway. Without the corporate salary, without Grandpa Thomas's financial safety net, and crushed under the massive legal fees from Chase's failed defense, they defaulted on their mortgages. The bank foreclosed on the multi-million-dollar home they loved more than they had ever loved their own daughter. I drove past their neighborhood once just to see it. The bright red foreclosure sign was staked directly into their perfectly manicured front lawn, a glowing neon beacon of their failure. The luxury SUVs were gone, repossessed by the dealerships. They were forced to pack whatever basic belongings they could fit into a rented box truck and leave the affluent suburbs forever. They had to downsize to a tiny, cramped two-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex on the far outskirts of the city. There were no granite countertops, no heated pools, and no sweeping driveways. They were surrounded by thin walls and peeling paint, forced to live the exact kind of struggling life my mother used to mock. I heard from a distant cousin that Linda tried to arrange her remaining crystal vases and silver platters in the tiny living room, desperately holding on to the illusion of wealth in a space that barely fit a sofa. The social exile was absolute and immediate. The elite circle they had worshipped completely erased them. The country club permanently revoked their membership, citing unpaid dues and a strict moral turpitude clause. The wealthy Linda had desperately tried to impress the women she used to gossip with while tearing me down, stopped returning her calls. When she walked into a discount grocery store, nobody recognized her. She was no longer a powerful matriarch. She was just a tired, aging woman pushing a squeaky shopping cart with a son in federal prison. Harrison could not find a job. No respectable firm in the city would hire a 60-year-old disgraced former CEO whose company had collapsed in a spectacular cloud of federal wire fraud and embezzlement. His country club buddies who used to play golf with him simply pretended they had never met him. He spent his days sitting in that cramped apartment staring at a small television, stripped of the power and authority he had hoarded his entire life. They had sacrificed everything for the illusion of the golden child. They had burned their relationship with me to the ground to keep him warm. And now the fire was out. They were left sitting in the cold, gray ashes with absolutely nothing to show for it. I did not feel sorry for them. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I had spent 34 years asking for basic respect, and they had answered with systemic abuse, gaslighting, and betrayal. They had made their choices with clear eyes and sound minds. Now the consequences were entirely theirs to bear. The toxic hierarchy they had built to keep me at the bottom had completely collapsed, crushing them under its weight. And I was standing miles away, entirely untouched by the rubble. The physical eradication of my father's logistics company from the Oak Street Industrial Park took exactly 14 days. Once the county sheriffs had executed the landlord's lien and the bankruptcy courts had auctioned off the seized corporate assets to pay down the mounting debts, the massive facility was finally empty. I walked through the cavernous, echoing space on a quiet Tuesday morning. The air smelled of stale motor oil exhaust fumes and decades of stagnant ambition. Harrison had run his business exactly how he ran his family, relying on outdated habits, refusing to innovate, and expecting blind, unearned loyalty to cover up his glaring operational failures. The peeling yellow safety paint on the warehouse floors and the broken filing cabinets left behind in the executive offices were a perfect decaying monument to his arrogance. I did not feel a shred of nostalgia as I walked through the empty loading docks. I hired a top-tier commercial demolition crew the very next day. I did not just clean the building to put it back on the rental market. I completely gutted it from the inside out. I stripped the entire sprawling facility down to its steel bones and bare concrete foundation. I poured millions of dollars from my holding company into a massive state-of-the-art renovation project. We tore out the low, oppressive drop ceilings and installed massive industrial skylights that flooded the warehouse floor with brilliant natural light. We upgraded the entire electrical grid to support heavy server loads and advanced automated machinery. We retrofitted the loading bays for autonomous robotics and built sleek modern office suites with floor-to-ceiling glass walls. I was actively transforming a broken relic of the past into a shining beacon of the future. The project took 4 months of relentless, grueling work, but I oversaw every single detail with absolute precision. For the first time in my entire life, I was building something massive out in the open, completely unburdened by the need to hide my success from my envious, greedy family. The market response to the newly renovated space was instantaneous and overwhelmingly lucrative before the final coat of protective sealant was even dry on the concrete floors. I had 3 major international corporations engaged in a fierce bidding war for the master lease. I ultimately divided the massive square footage and signed 2 exceptional tenants. The first was an innovative green energy logistics startup, and the second was a multinational biotech distribution hub. Both companies eagerly signed 10-year ironclad commercial leases at premium market rates. The monthly rental income they generated was nearly triple what my father had been paying for the exact same footprint. By the end of the fiscal year, my commercial real estate portfolio had not just stabilized, it had doubled in total valuation. I was no longer just a successful supply chain consultant operating quietly in the shadows. I was widely recognized as a formidable powerhouse in the commercial real estate sector. I completely controlled my financial empire, and more importantly, I completely controlled my own narrative. Whenever industry peers or local business owners asked about the sudden collapse of my father's company or the highly publicized rumors regarding my brother's federal conviction, I did not offer dramatic emotional explanations. I did not play the victim. I simply offered a polite, practiced corporate smile and stated that my holding company had acquired the asset through standard legal channels following the previous tenant's unfortunate insolvency. I gave them absolutely nothing to gossip about. I starved the local rumor mill of oxygen. My absolute unshakable professionalism cemented my reputation, while the sheer silence surrounding my parents finalized their social erasure. Grandpa Thomas thrived in this new environment. Freed from the constant stress of watching his son destroy his legacy, the patriarch of our family seemed to age in reverse. We spent hours in my downtown office seamlessly integrating his massive estate into my primary limited liability company, ensuring that the wealth he had built with his own 2 hands would be protected and multiplied for generations to come. I became my most trusted advisor, offering decades of ruthless business acumen, while I provided the modern strategic execution he had been desperately searching for. A year after the chaotic showdown at the corporate gala, the dust had entirely settled. I stood on the sprawling teak balcony of my brand new custom-built waterfront home. The house was a stunning architectural masterpiece of glass and natural stone perched right on the edge of the water. The evening breeze coming off the lake was crisp and refreshing, carrying the faint, clean scent of the water and the surrounding pine trees. I leaned against the thick glass railing, holding a crystal glass of vintage red wine, listening to the gentle rhythmic sound of the waves lapping against the private shoreline below. Sitting a few feet away in a plush custom leather patio chair was Grandpa Thomas. He had a matching glass of wine resting on the small teak table beside him, and a thick woven wool blanket draped comfortably over his knees. We were watching the sun begin its slow descent over the water, painting the sky in brilliant, breathtaking strokes of gold, burnt orange, and deep violet. There was no tension in the air. There was no underlying anxiety, no waiting for the next inevitable familial explosion. There was only the profound, unshakable peace of a life built on absolute, undeniable truth. My phone was resting on the patio table between us. The screen suddenly lit up, breaking the serene twilight. The device vibrated, emitting a short, sharp buzz against the glass surface. I set my wine glass down and picked up the phone. The caller identification displayed a number I had not seen in months. It was a new prepaid cell phone number, but the frantic, desperate tone of the message preview was instantly recognizable. It was a massive, multi-paragraph text message from my mother, Linda. The block of text was a chaotic, messy, rambling plea for salvation. She wrote that the tiny apartment they were renting was unbearable. She complained that the heating was constantly broken and the landlord refused to fix it because they were behind on their utility payments. She lamented that Harrison was deeply depressed, sitting in the dark all day and refusing to get out of bed or look for employment. She wrote about how much she missed her beautiful life, how much she missed the country club, and how she had absolutely no money left for basic groceries. The final paragraph of the text was a masterclass in classic maternal manipulation. She begged me to remember that I was her only daughter. She pleaded for a small loan just to survive the winter, promising that she would pay me back every single cent. She promised that things would be different. She promised she had changed, and she promised that she loved me more than anything in the world. I stood on my beautiful balcony, looking at the glowing screen of my phone. A year ago, a message like this would have sent a sharp, painful spike of guilt straight through my chest. I would have agonized over my duty as a daughter. I would have questioned whether my boundaries were too harsh, whether I was being too cruel by leaving them to suffer in the very poverty they used to mock. I would have felt the desperate, familiar urge to fix their problems just to earn a fleeting moment of their approval. But standing there now, surrounded by the empire I had built with my own hands, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger. There was no vindictive joy. There was only a cold, sterile indifference. The woman who sent that text message was a stranger to me. She was a ghost from a past life, a life where I was treated as a disposable stepping stone for a golden child who was currently sitting in a federal prison cell. I did not type out a response. I did not send a single word of explanation or justification. I did not owe her my anger, and I certainly did not owe her my money. I simply tapped the settings icon on the top right corner of the screen, scrolled down to the bottom of the menu, and pressed the button to block the caller. The screen went dark. I set the phone face down on the table, severing the very last invisible thread that tied me to the woman who had spent my entire life trying to tear me down. I picked up my wine glass and walked back over to the railing. Grandpa Thomas looked up at me, his sharp blue eyes catching the golden light of the setting sun. He did not ask who had texted. He already knew. He simply raised his glass toward me in a silent, dignified toast to our shared victory. I clinked my glass gently against his, the pure crystal ringing like a clear, bright bell in the quiet evening air. I took a slow, savoring sip of the vintage wine and watched the sun finally dip below the horizon, completely, totally, and permanently free from the toxic shadow of the golden child.